This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Mr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Glad to be back.
We've had lots of interchanges on many subjects, often involving the law, our country, the situation we find ourselves in. And tonight, maybe we can talk about the conflict that exists between the different branches of government, particularly between the executive and the legislative branch, and maybe get some wisdom for how the Constitution says we're supposed to resolve these issues.
Well, I'm full of wisdom tonight.
Well, good. I'm ready to hear it. So right now, it's not an uncommon situation when we have divided government.
Yes.
This is normal, and many people actually like that. They say, well, maybe if everyone is just going to, they'll checkmate each other, the branches will fight against each other, and nothing will happen, and the American people will benefit. So at least that's the idea.
Yes. Yep.
But you could say that the way the world goes now is the power of the executive, for many reasons, is sort of trumping that of Congress.
Yes.
And one of the issues that's come along these days is the idea that often the executive is either propagating regulations that amount to laws or refusing to enforce the laws that have been passed by Congress. Is that a fair reading?
Yes, I think you can see a little of both of that, and it's not something new. It's been something that's been creeping in for at least 100 years. It's just the nature of the beast. And it's gotten worse as society has, if you will, speeded up. The speeding up of transportation, the speeding up of communication, ultimately the speeding up of transatlantic nuclear bombers was a big stimulus to this. Walter Lippmann, I think in the 50s, wrote a wonderful short little book. I'm not sure if it's still available, but I would urge people to get it, called The Public Philosophy, and how the executive people look to a single individual who can make a quick decision without having to call a committee meeting or a hearing or an investigation. Just by virtue of being a single brain, he can snap his fingers and say, here's what we're going to do. And that's a dangerous thing. It's people look to it in a time of crisis, but it has a very dangerous downside.
So it does. And I mean, in general, you wouldn't want to have this set of circumstances as a routine arrangement. And the courts are the arbitrators, are they not, between this conflict? So the courts allegedly are watching what's going on.
Yes.
In these, is there some, does the executive branch exercise increasing control over the courts? Are the courts truly independent? Do they see themselves as these arbitrators, or are they sort of in sync with the executive and trying to get his will accomplished?
Well, I don't think that the courts are the tool of the executive. There are a couple of qualifications there. Presumably, a president is not going to nominate someone for a federal judicial appointment, and certainly not the Supreme Court, if he views that person as being too out of sync philosophically with him. That can sometimes backfire. The two biggest backfires I can think of in that regard, the first was Justice Joseph Story, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and he was nominated by James Madison specifically to be a counterweight to the strongly Federalist John Marshall. And
Yes.
John Marshall's probably the greatest Chief Justice, certainly the most influential we've ever had.
Yes.
Story was a very smart person, was
Yes.
extraordinarily brilliant, but he fell under Marshall's, not influence,
Yes.
but his, Story
Je ne
was
sais
very much his
quoi,
own
his
person.
charm,
Yes,
whatever,
exactly.
right? He was a very charming guy.
And the two became an intellectual powerhouse, which was probably to the consternation of Madison. The other one was Earl Warren,
Yes.
and Eisenhower was heard to say sometime after the Brown versus Board and perhaps Little Rock decision, worst damn appointment I ever made.
Uh-huh.
And and justices, once they get on the bench, tend to be their own people, do what they will. They tend, if they move at all, they tend to move to the left and not to the right. So I would say that they are not the creatures of the president, but they can be the product of the ideology that produced them. And the danger is that they will follow their own idea of justice instead of doing what they think the law dictates.
Often, not that I know much about this, but often if you're on the Supreme Court, the circles that you would move in those times would be sort of academic, sort of a quasi-academic thing. There might be retreats. The interchange would take place, might be with law professors.
Yes.
The law review articles that are being written, you'd sort of maybe look at them a little bit and say, well, you know, maybe I missed that. And it'd be more, and those circles are somewhat to the left. Is that one of the things that takes judges a bit to the left? The circles they move in after they've been appointed, or maybe that's too hard of a say?
Well, to the degree that the academy in general in America tends to be somewhat left.
Yes.
I think you can see that, and I think a disproportionate number of judges have been professors in the past.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, Kagan, who is, I believe, the most recent appointment,
Yes.
was strongly criticized because not only was she an academic, she
Yes.
had zero judicial experience
Yes.
prior to that point.
Yes.
Normally, you would see somebody with more of a balance there.
Yes.
So.
And just to keep talking about it, is it unusual? Have there been, you could say the other side of the legal world would be corporation lawyers, no offense, whatever, I mean, but are people that are maybe or in a big major law firm.
Yes. Yes.
That's dealing with mercantile questions.
Yes.
A very prosperous type of person, deals with, company presidents. Aren't those, and they make a lot of money too, and are those people rarely appointed to judicial positions, and that particular part of the bar is not there, and they don't influence judges as much? Your thoughts?
At one time, they actually were well represented on the court. I think of the Gilded Age, the late 19th century, the era of big business. You saw people who had that kind of background. I tend to think that it has gotten more academic since then, since law schools became more institutionalized, which really started hitting the big time in the early 20th century. I think you tended to see the direction head in we got a more academic result.
Well, what I tried to do was make the case that no, they're not doing their job. They're letting the executive, which in this case is a Democratic executive, do whatever they want. And there was a recent case that disproves what I've said a little bit on Yucca Mountain. Could you talk about that, and what did the courts do about this conflict between the two branches?
Yes, this is the Aiken case. It was just decided not recently, as we're taping this, on August the 13th, I believe it was. This was a case that has come out of the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. This is a federal court of appeals.
And that's a pretty liberal group. Is that or no?
It depends on the judge.
It
depends on the judges you come up with.
Yes.
Most of the Reagan appointees are gone now, obviously. Yes. But the D.C. Circuit Court is usually held to be the second most important court in the country after the Supreme Court itself.
Yes.
It's a court of appeals. It's a federal court. It is based in D.C., so it hears a lot of test cases
Yes.
on federal laws and federal statutes and federal regs. So the Aiken case came out of a situation of Yucca Mountain. And Yucca Mountain has been in the works since the Reagan years to be the repository for nuclear waste, both civil and military. And there have been all kinds of studies done, there have been surveys
Yes.
done. Yucca Mountain was one of three possibilities. And Congress has passed several laws. The most recent law has appropriated $11 million to allow the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to go through the licensing process to give Yucca Mountain a license to hold all this nuclear waste, about 80,000 tons of it.
And this is a
Yes.
big deal. I mean, the argument is not in my backyard kind of
Yes.
opinion. I mean, obviously, maybe they'll put one in rural Jones County, and I know offense to Jones County. No one would like to have a huge nuclear repository located next to the local school. I mean, I can see
Exactly.
the point. No one wants it.
Yes, and they've tried to pick as isolated a place as
Yes.
they can, but the neighbors are not going to like it.
Right.
So the process is going forward, and they're applying for the license from the NRC. The NRC has 5 elected or appointed commissioners. They are appointed by the president for 5-year terms. The current 5 commissioners have all been they're all either Obama appointees or Obama reappointees.
Yes.
And they decided about 3 or 4 years ago, I think in 2009, 2010, that we are simply not going forward with this licensing process, even though Congress said, here's the money, you shall go forward with the process.
Yes. And the president,
Yes.
some presidents signed the law.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe it was, I think the most recent legislation was Bush in 2006.
All right, okay. A Republican
Yes.
president. Okay.
And it was started under a Republican Reagan.
Yes.
And the NRC has said, we're not going through with this process. Now, one of the main reasons they gave was $11 million is not enough to complete the licensing process.
Yes.
And Congress may not vote us the rest of the money we need.
Yes.
And we don't want to we're trying to show some responsibility for the public fisc here. We're trying not
Yes,
to waste
yes,
this
yes.
money, so we're not going to move on it. And it's
Right.
not that they are moving and rejecting. They are not moving. They are not
Yes.
going forward in the process. And various states like South Carolina and Washington that are getting backed up in nuclear waste
Yes.
brought suit saying you don't have this discretion.
Right,
You've
yes.
got to do it. The Court of Appeals for D.C. Circuit just came out on August 13th and said they agreed with South Carolina and Washington. Yes, NRC, we agree. You don't have the discretion just to sit around
Right.
and do nothing. You've got to move forward on this.
Yes.
So presumably now they're going to move forward if they don't try to take it to the Supreme Court.
Now, the conflict that occurs between the executive branch and the legislative branch often centers on commissions and appointed groups of one type or another. What power does the president have? If you've appointed someone to a commission that they're not doing what they're supposed to, someone called the president up and said, look, these guys aren't going to do anything. Mm-hmm. What can the president do? Do these people have tenure? Could they serve at the president's pleasure? I mean, could he fire them? What happens? I mean, say we're going to do this. Any
Yes.
comments? I mean,
there are 5-year terms. I don't know of any mechanism. There may be a mechanism to get them off. I'm certain they could be impeached.
that would be rather difficult, would it not?
Yes, impeachment is a very high bar. So there may be a process for getting them off. I just don't know. Certainly, you're not going to get reappointed. I think the thing you're getting at here is that it's pretty clear. Obama is very clearly on record
Yes.
that he does not like the Yucca Mountain solution.
Right.
He actually made a campaign promise that he would shut down Yucca Mountain were he elected.
Aha! Do you
Yes.
think politics were involved?
No,
okay.
not at all.
Yes.
But of course, it was pointed out that he could
Since
not.
he's a politician,
Yes, he
yes.
could not unilaterally shut down the process. It had been
Yes.
established by
Yes.
statute.
Yes.
But he could certainly appoint people who shared his outlook that Yucca Mountain was a bad idea. And since all 5 of the current commissioners either are Obama appointees or reappointees, where there's smoke,
So it
there's
could
fire.
almost be the quid pro quo for getting on a particular commission.
The litmus test,
right.
the
You can say,
off-spoken of
well, you're
litmus
going to do
test,
this,
yes.
but you've got to.
Yes.
Well, now another way this interfaces, I guess, with our contemporary world is in the Affordable Health Care Act. So there's another controversy along those lines. This incredible act was passed. Who knows what's in it? And we'll discover something every day about it.
Yes.
So there are thousands of pages of law, thousands of pages of regulations, and presumably the executive branch is picking and choosing what it wishes to do with the law.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
is that what are we entering into here? I mean, do laws mean anything? I mean, is that a tradition? This actually, I don't want to be too critical because it probably often happens, doesn't it? I mean, it's a common theme about the executive.
Well, as chief law enforcement officer, Obama, as well as Eric Holder, as well as any district attorney or federal attorney in the nation they have this prosecutorial discretion.
Yes.
That you have to look at the particulars of the case. You have to decide whether it furthers the public safety, whether it follows the purposes of the law, whether it follows the interest of community,
Yes.
to prosecute this particular person or not, whether there's a strong enough case, whether
Yes.
it would take too many resources. So in some regards, as chief executive, he does have a discretion. But I see a difference in discretion as to who to prosecute. There's a difference between that and the discretion as to whether or not to enforce a law.
Yes.
Now, I suppose you could still say this law is too difficult, it would eat up too much money, but there is a tremendous irony in having pushed so hard for such a massive piece of legislation and then turning around and saying, but I'm not going to enforce it for another year. And when the time period he has chosen turns to be right after the next congressional midterm elections,
Yes.
it starts raising major concerns. So,
Yes. Well, I guess just the broader question is, as we have, it seems like the country is getting more polarized. I mean, maybe I'm wrong in my suspicions, but there's a lot of centrifugal force in the country. So you have, I guess, the Democratic Party, and they have their agenda. The Republicans have theirs, and they're having these tremendous clashes. But is it going to be, are we going to get into sort of an ungovernable kind of arrangement soon? I mean, if Congress passes, it's going to pass a law, the executive will not enforce it. The executive is going to just say, I'm going to do what, I'm going to have executive orders, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And the powers the Congress have is just to not fund things. They can, particularly the House of Representatives, I mean, we're going to have some kind of enormous, just, I guess, soul-destroying gridlock in Congress, I mean, in Washington. Or is that a possibility? Any thoughts?
We've already got it in Congress, and I think you're just going to see it mushroom out. And I think the problem is it's not with the system, although bigger is always harder to govern. It's always harder to manage. And the federal government for the last 30 years has been bloated beyond anything anyone's ever seen. So that contributes to the problem. But it's also the degree of polarization, that the parties have moved farther and farther apart, and they're as far apart now as they've ever been in American history. I see 3 times of extraordinary partisanship in American history. The first was the late 1790s, and that fizzled out. It turned out the parties were closer together than they realized. Yes. The second one resulted in the worst war in our history. And in the years going up to the Civil War, you actually had members of Congress carrying guns into the Senate and House chambers to protect themselves from assault by other members of Congress. We are not quite there yet, but we're close, and we've been close, and I trace it back to the horrible 1-2 punch of Vietnam and Watergate that gave political leadership in both parties a horrible black eye. And we have not recovered from it yet. The moderates deserted the parties, the firebrands were left in control, and we are where we are now.
Is it the problem? I mean, in some ways, we talk about this constitutional issues that Congress, well, anyone, but particularly Congress, they try and arrange with their friends in the state legislature to gerrymander their districts. So we have this extraordinary gerrymandering going on, and about the only way that, if you're an incumbent, about the only way that you could lose an election would be that if someone to either, if you're a Republican to your right or if a Democrat to your left, beat you with this picked group of voters. So it's driving, people want to stay in power, they're being driven to extremes by the gerrymandering that's taken place in Congress.
Well, the perks of being in Congress are terrific, especially when it comes to having the leverage to get yourself reelected. If you can clear the hurdle of your first reelection, then you're home free regarding some massive redistricting. You've got the frank, you've got the ability, you've got the district offices, you've got the ability to essentially dispense patronage. So,
do you think people in Congress are good at that or not?
I think it's
they're pretty good at it.
To get there, you've got to be good at it, and once you're there, you just get better.
You tend to stay there a pretty long time.
The American Parliament.
Well, I mean, so just this difficulty the country's experiencing right now, it does seem like it's the goals and aspirations of each party are so much in conflict it really is worrisome, isn't it? I mean, the lack of sense of a community, it's a big problem, isn't it?
And a lot of people recognize the problem. A lot of people, even within the system, recognize the problem, but they can't do anything about it. The grip of partisanship is just too strong. About the best thing they can do is to resign before it goes off the rails.
Yes.
If you ask me what I think will happen, my guess is some massive financial crisis that will provoke some sort of revolution. Maybe not an Egyptian-style revolution, but the sort of revolution that we have seen in this country in the past, when the people just rise up and say, not enough. The bonus army of 1930,
right.
Coxey's army of 1896.
Yes.
Formation of a new party, the Jacksonian
right,
Party
right,
in the 1820s.
Right.
The formation of the Republican Party in the 1850s. It's interesting to see how the Republican Party has fought the Tea Party because it sees the Tea Party as taking away the nice, comfortable existence that the Republicans in office have had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think those politicians, we know, I don't think we have to repeat the obvious. I mean, whatever their deal is, I think that's pretty widely known, both people that run for president and otherwise. Well, I mean, is some of the things going on now, is the executive branch really pushing, I mean, you have this sort of balance, you could say, but is the executive branch particularly pushing an agenda that's maybe might not have been so aggressive in the past? The relationships have been, they're the people that are going over the boundaries a little bit, if I could say it that way,
Yes.
with the decisions they're making. And
well, it's a very ham-handed way. I mean, Obama shows no legislative finesse whatsoever. Not on the order of an FDR, not on the order of a Ronald Reagan, who could sit down with Tip O'Neill and get results.
right.
When have we last seen that? Not even Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton got our budget balanced.
Right.
Obama not only seems incapable of doing something like that, he doesn't even seem interested in trying to do that. He would much rather govern by fiat. Here are 6 more executive orders since Congress is not moving the way I wanted them to.
Well, that's a problem. So, I'd say it's a problem. I mean, obviously it's difficult to understand what goes on in the Oval Office, what the whole story is, who knows. But it does appear that the executive orders are out there. Many of them are quite inflammatory, and it just seems to be sort of a pattern of that occurring. And it's sort of eating out of the bowl of Congress a bit, and then not enforcing congressional laws. When we look at immigration reform, which I think everybody would like to get some kind of situation resolved there, it depends on mutual trust. So right now, the trust titer is so low on both sides that any major legislation is going to be essentially just stopped because
yes.
I guess the Republicans would say we don't really trust the government, the executive branch, to enforce anything. We do a deal, and if there's some kind of selective enforcement arrangements, that doesn't work. So what I'm getting at is this: maybe we need more of these Yucca Mountain type of interventions by the courts to really chomp down a lot about what's transpiring.
Yes, although if you give the courts too much power, which has also happened on occasion in our past. I don't really see the problem. Congress is dysfunctional. It's just flatly dysfunctional. And the Affordable Care Act was a fluke, that we were coming out of 8 years of extremely expensive and unpopular wars waged largely by Republicans, which resulted in a backlash that just barely, by the skin of their teeth, happened to give the Democrats a filibuster-proof majority for 2 years. And in that 2 years, through rules mechanics, they drove a truck through that filibuster and got the Affordable Care Act. So to argue that the Affordable Care Act shows that Congress can still accomplish things just completely misunderstands the dynamic. So,
a question would be, I mean, I guess, I'm obviously a physician. I see patients every day. I have responsibility for them. It's very worrisome as to what this I mean, I can recognize there's obviously efforts to do some good things, and I get it. I understand a lot of the ideas out there are useful, but just the whole matrices, this complicated healthcare system. is really going to be rattled substantially and very soon. And the idea about the government being good enough for the American people, that's a question, isn't it? Is our government good enough for the American people, or is it a representation of the American people? I mean,
Yes.
is this the best we can do, or is this what we deserve?
Well, as Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except all the other forms that have been tried from time to time.
Well, just to keep at it a little bit, I mean, is there, if you were president, do you really need Congress? What do you need Congress for? Couldn't you just do executive order after executive order after executive order? You could veto whatever Congress presented, and then you could just not enforce it. If they overrode your veto, then you just don't enforce it.
Yes, it's interesting. If you look at the presidents who traditionally rank as the best, they were very good at having their way with Congress. Lincoln and both of the Roosevelts managed to interpret their powers in such a way as to get what they wanted without running afoul of Congress. Ever since the Nixon days, it's just brute force. It's ham-handed. There's no art to it at all. It's sitting there issuing edicts, and I don't know where it stops. I really don't.
Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, we have a lot of complicated things in the world, but a big thing is the role money plays in this whole thing. The media plays in it. The sophistry of the electoral process. All right, on that note, I'm going to give you 30 seconds for a last remark on this complicated, divided government situation.
Well, the best I can do in 30 seconds is just a meditation on the idea of government by and of the people. The Puritan John Cotton said in the 1600s, "If the people be the governors, who be the governed?"
Yes, indeed. Well,
Best I can do.
well, that's good, Bucky. That's good. So thank you for coming. We'll have some more discussions
Thanks a
on
lot.
these issues. Thanks a lot. It's very nice.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.